So welcome everybody to our GAPLA online talk in September. And for the ones who don't know, GAPLA is a association for lawyers from German-speaking and Australasian jurisdictions to connect and network. And today in our online talk, we have Jessica McLaren, who's a very dear friend of mine and has been already for many, many years. And Jessica is currently the solicitor in charge of the community legal education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. She graduated with an arts and law degree from the University of Wollongong in 2006, and that was where we met. And she obtained a Master of Laws from the Australian National University in 2013. She started her legal career as an associate at the Australian Capital Territory Supreme Court, followed by several years in litigation roles. And she then worked in Kiribati as the People's Lawyer at the Office of the People's Lawyer and the legal mentor in the Solomon Islands Public Solicitor's Office. And of that, you will tell us more. So, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Well, thank you for having me. I've got some slides and I've got some notes and more pictures to come, but absolutely interrupt me at any time. It's not like a formal presentation. So if you want more info or clarifying details or anything, I'll see what I can do to answer. So to start with, I'm at Legal Aid New South Wales at the moment, and the reason that I ended up working in this sort of role is because of the time that I spent in the Pacific, where the two offices that I worked in were basically the legal aid of those countries. I was working in a corporate environment before that in litigation, and I was not a happy camper. So I wanted a change, and I can still remember being at the DLA Piper farewell lunch that they put on for me, and someone said, "So what are you going to do there? Like, will you just be able to go to the movies or just do some shopping?" And I'm like, they don't have a cinema. The shops are not what you think they're going to be. It's just like a building on the side of the road. So it was quite a leap to imagine what life was going to be like, but I was excited for a change, and I had done a lot of aid and development and international law sort of subjects in my undergrad and my master's. So it was an interest that I wanted to explore. So that's what I did. So these are pictures of Tarawa, which is where I lived in Kiribati. So some little Kiribati information is you sort of can't really see it on a map unless you zoom in so close that you lose all perspective of what area you're dealing with. So usually when I describe it to people is you can see where the international date line swings around in a funny shape. That's because the islands are all through the middle of that, and they moved the international date line so that the country was all operating on the same day. And then Kiribati is pronounced with an S, and anytime you see a TI in an Kiribati word, it's always pronounced S. And the joke is that the missionary who first came to Kiribati and tried to write the language, that his typewriter had a broken S, and so he just changed it to TI, and it causes a great deal of confusion, but that's where we are. So the country is 32 coral atolls spread across 811 square kilometres of ocean. So the furthest islands are apart are about the distance of Perth and Sydney, but it's just all water in the middle, and the highest point is 3 meters above sea level. So often any discussion that you'll hear about Kiribati is specifically about what's happening with climate change and is the island going to disappear. It's a Micronesian country with about 120,000 people, and it was colonised by the UK and then made independent in 1979. And they speak Kiribati, which I did not do a very good job of learning because I was lucky enough to have an interpreter with me at work all the time. But one thing that you would say is "Come na bene in Maori," which would be me making a formal greeting to you all. So "Come na bene in Maori," and then you would all say "Maori Maori" in response.
Maori Maori.
Thank you. So that's a little Kiribati primer. And then we have the Solomon Islands. So that's where I went next. Solomon's is a little bit closer in to Australia. So hopefully you can kind of get a sense of it there. Also colonised by the UK and also got independence in the 70s, in 1978. This is a Melanesian community and there's about 650,000 people. They have an official language of English, but not really anybody speaks it fluently. They speak Pidgin and about 70 local languages. So I did have to learn Pidgin because I didn't have an interpreter with me all the time. And Pidgin's a little bit easier to learn. So in this situation, I might say to you, "Me happy to mas for meeting you fella," which is, "I'm pleased to meet you all." I like to follow the Solomon Islands broadcasting company on Facebook because often they put little stories on and then I can keep practicing my Pidgin. Okay, so the program that I was doing to go there is called Australian Volunteers for International Development, and the way that it works is the program connects host organisations with people in Australia who have the right sort of skills to support that host organisation. And it's sort of a like a soft diplomacy, sort of goodwill kind of program. So we're not hired by DFAT to be there, but this program sits under the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So they match you with host organisations in developing countries all over the world, but the program mostly at the moment especially is more focused on Asia and the Pacific, but there has been roles in Africa and Latin America as well. So a little bit of a foreign affairs development assistance budget trivia for you, which is that the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea get the most of Australia's aid budget in the Pacific, and the Solomon Islands gets about $100 million, and it's going down a little bit, which is something I'll talk to you about when we get to law and order, but it's been around about 150 to 100 million, whereas Kiribati, a little bit smaller, gets around 30 million of aid expenditure from Australia. And because it is in an aid and development context, when we're working there, these are the sustainable development goals. So each of the programs that Australia runs is focused on a few of these that relate to the specific needs of the countries. So that was kind of what we were thinking about for like justice for me, especially because that's what I was working in the legal sector. So here's some little pictures. This is, let me see, so this is called a maniaba, which is like a traditional meeting hut. So you can see that we've kind of gone a bit modern with some concreting here, but like traditionally that they would be making it out like coconut tree logs. But if you're on one of the outer islands, one of the really small ones, this is where you would go to that's where I went when I was meeting clients and doing community legal education with the village. It's also where people would sleep if you're having like a community event or something. Everyone would set up their mosquito nets, so every community would have one. This one is a picture of the courthouse. So it did have a tin roof. So when the rain was really heavy, which happened often, you couldn't hear each other, and I would just be like screaming at the judge from behind the bar table, and it's just like, this does not seem right, but you make do. I used to wear I don't know, what do we say? I say thongs, but flip-flops, or what do you? Well, yeah. I don't want to seem indiscreet.
Flip-flops.
Yeah, so I would be wearing rubber thongs with my robes, which was an interesting look, but the ground was just constantly wet from all the rain. And then this.
So Jessica, just wondering, because you did litigation beforehand, was that actually useful to have that experience, or do you think you could have also managed if you had been more of a office inhabiting lawyer?
I had to go and read the Evidence Act again because in Australia I would appear in early proceedings and directions hearings and things, because I was more junior, but we would always brief counsel if we were actually running a hearing. Whereas here I was counsel as well as a solicitor running the matter back in the office. So I did have to refresh my memory of how do you tender something as evidence, but then I was okay. So they do.
So was it the Australian Evidence Act you actually looked into?
It's
okay.
Theirs was it the English one, or so what basically happened is when the English left in the 70s, they had all of the English legislation up to the 70s, and then they started making their own. So sometimes you have to look and say, has it made its own acts since the British left? Yes, okay, you can follow that. If they haven't, then you go back and you're looking at old English law. So for the Evidence Act, I think it was I don't think they had their own one. So it was basically like Australian and English traditions are so similar in that way that it wasn't too bad. But the judge was a retired Solomon Islands judge, so he didn't speak Kiribati. So all of the high court proceedings were in, which is sort of it's the highest court. All of those proceedings are in English, which was fine for me because he and I could speak to each other quite easily. And then the prosecutors, their English was really good because they do their law degrees in English. But then the witnesses and my client, none of them would speak English well enough to be able to give evidence in English. So then the court would have a translator, but the prosecutors would be able to understand the evidence being given in the original language, and they would be correcting the interpreters. So then I would bring my own interpreters from the office so that I could say I can't be here without my own backup of exactly what's being said. So it was a bit tricky, and all of the statements and things, and if something was an appeal from the magistrate's court, which is in Kiribati, all of those documents had to be translated into English. So we all had to have really capable translators to make the whole system work, which was pretty extraordinary, really, but they did a great job. So that's sort of the buildings. And then these are some fun little ones. So this is me standing out the front of our office with just some random ladies in the shade, because we always just wanted to find shade. The dress code was basically white and black. So then you put your robes on over the top of that. So this was my farewell, and I'm wearing the traditional top, which is called a sibuta. And that says Sabo Jessica, which means goodbye. This was a little grainy, but that is me in the outfit. We didn't have to wear a bar jacket because it was so hot, but we just had the the bib and the robe and the wig. And then this was me with my team. So that was my interpreter. And then this is a paralegal and two of my solicitor colleagues. So that's our little gang. And then we've got the Solomon Islands. So this is Parliament and this is the High Court. So I just wondered, do you guys know about the tensions? Have you ever heard of the tensions? No? Okay, cool. So it's an interesting one because it was essentially a 5-year civil war that happened in the Solomon Islands from 1998 to 2003. And it was a conflict between two provinces, Guadalcanal, which is the island where the capital is, where I live, and another province called Malaita. And there was a big dispute about resources always going to the capital, but land ownership and all this sort of thing. So it got very serious because people divided on cultural lines rather than saying, well, I'm a police officer, so I'm going to uphold the law. Instead, it was, well, I'm a Malaitan, so I'm now against you. And they released prisoners from the jail. They took all the guns from the police station. So it was an extremely dangerous time. So what happened was in 2003, the Solomon Islands government requested help from its specific neighbours. So then we had RAMSI, which is the Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands, and that was Australia, New Zealand, and 13 Pacific Island countries who all contributed resources and personnel to be able to help. So Australia had soldiers and federal police there, and they basically had to confiscate all the guns. And then there was a process of hearings to try all of the people for the violence, and there was a lot of kidnapping and murder, and it was very serious. So the RAMSI mission ended in 2017. So I was there in 2016, and I left in about Easter. And just after I left, they were starting to talk about giving the police back their guns. So the community was still like not really ready to trust that everything would be okay. So now they've got them back and everything seems to be going quite smoothly, but there was a lot of discussion when I was there about the law and order side of things and faith in the government being restored, but whether or not they'd actually resolved the underlying issues, which perhaps is still, something that they need to work on. But yeah, so that is a large part in why Australia has so much involvement in the Solomon Islands, because of trying to support them to restore law and order. So this is me with two of my colleagues. Love a decorative shirt. So we were the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs, and this was for a basically sports carnival for grown-ups that the government was running. So we had shirts, we had a parade. I was in the volleyball team. And then this was the office. So sorry, again, it's a bit grainy, but it was just like a very unassuming front door leading up to our offices upstairs, but we were right across the road from the Central Market. So it was a pretty good location to be in. So that's kind of a bit of a taster, I guess, of some of the law and ordery type things. The next slide I've got for you is just a piece of legislation from both countries, from their criminal code, which is sorcery. And people are usually a bit surprised by this, so maybe this is something that's a bit fun, which is that there is actually it is illegal to use sorcery, but it's also illegal to make it seem like you are, because I think they don't, you know, it's not exactly saying that sorcery is real, but if you're acting in a way that makes people think that you are. But it is an extremely serious issue. So when I was in the Solomon Islands, and I was actually on one of the smaller islands for a couple of weeks doing some legal clinics, and a lady came to see me because she heard that I was in town, and so she'd made her way secretly to come and see me because she had had her house burnt down and run out of her village, and she had been staying with the police officer in the village who was like, who was a woman who had said to her, "You better get out of here," because what had happened is she had held a child, and shortly after she had held this baby, the baby had passed away, and the father of the child had said that he had a dream that she did something to this baby, and so they said, well, it must be witchcraft, and so she killed this child, and so she got run out of town. So, you know, when she came to see me, I had to say to her, well, like, it's not really a legal remedy in this situation, because you can't really like sue the people who burnt your house down because they don't have any money, so you're not going to be able to get anything out of it. And in terms of the police prosecuting you, they're probably going to say that it was sorcery that you, so like whether or not the police would actually be able to support her in that small community as a victim of a crime as opposed to a perpetrator was a bit dubious. So it was very serious.
Just a quick question, if I may, on the sort of financial side of it, because looking at this, like 2 months or $40 or 6 months or $100, like, you know, I'd much rather pay the $100 and spend 6 months in a prison, or is $100 a lot more money over there?
Yes. So a lot of people don't have access to any money at all. So there's no like social services kind of money. And often you'll find people who, if they lose their job and they live in the capital, will go back to their home island where you don't actually need money because you can just fish and live off the land. So yeah, that is a lot of money.
Thanks.
If you were working like for the government, then you have a little bit more stability, and then you'll probably end up supporting your family. We had a house Mary, our house cleaner, who cleaned our house twice a week in the Solomon Islands, but we used to keep her pay at the house, and she would just take what she knew she would need to spend for the next few days, because if, especially the men in her family, knew how much money she had, she wouldn't be able to hang on to it, because everyone would just be like, oh, you know, Auntie's got some money, let's go and ask her. And so it's it can be really tricky, and so for a lot of people it's just easier if you're not actually like dealing with your own money, because everybody would expect it from you. So so you got that one, and then I thought I would show you these ones, which is actually what I was doing when I was there. In each country, the UN Women had done extensive consultation about domestic violence rates in the Pacific, and had created a piece of legislation, Family Protection Act, Family Peace Act. Everyone kind of changed the name a little bit, but it was basically a framework for domestic violence and having AVOs, apprehended violence orders, that specifically were trying to address the domestic violence issue, and it sort of criminalised DV in a way that they hadn't had before. So in Kiribati, it just was about to come in as I left, but it was very much like the talk of what was going to happen. And then for my role in the Solomon Islands, it was specifically to help with the implementation of this legislation. So from a community point of view, I did some trips around to the regional areas as well as in the capital to explain to people what the Act is and what domestic violence is and what they were going to have to do or not do now that the legislation was about to come into practice. And then for legal professionals, so within my office, the public solicitor's office, as well as some of the private lawyers, I was working on the training materials and the precedents and the information that the staff would have to be using when they were filing these in court and speaking to clients. And then I was also doing some work with the NGOs and government departments about what would happen with the new legislation and how they could support the implementation of it. So I think the report said, the UN's report said that Kiribati was #1 in the Pacific for incidences of domestic violence, and the Solomon Islands was #2. So it's sort of like you would be hard pressed to find a woman in either country who had never experienced domestic violence. It was an extremely prevalent issue, and the sort of thing that I don't think I could practice in family law and domestic violence issues in Australia, because somehow it felt too close to home to be working on that issue within my own community. But I was able to do it there, maybe because I could compartmentalize it a bit and think about myself as supporting the community and supporting the staff who were dealing with it all the time and who would continue to deal with it after I left, and doing what I could for the community legal education side to get people thinking about prevention, not just what they were going to do if it ended up with someone coming to see a solicitor. So yeah, that's what I was doing. That's my little story.
And did you, being a woman, did you experience any kind of behavior towards you because you say it's such a big issue? And she's nodding.
Just stop sharing my screen because we don't need that. So yeah, so it was the kind of thing where, especially as a single woman, I had to be a little bit more careful than my other Australian volunteers who maybe went over as part of a couple, because you're much less of a threat, and society is really set up to be, you know, women get married very young and have children very young. So it was a little bit tricky, especially because in Kiribati I was the people's lawyer, so I was the boss. I had a deputy people's lawyer who was a local lawyer who, after I left, became the first local lawyer to take that role. He'd been sort of getting that training through the years of having different Australian lawyers in the role. So it was a little bit hard because people weren't used to really being directed by women, especially men who were a lot older than me. And then within the community, it was like I had female friends, like my interpreter, Cabby. She had a little baby, and so I would often go down and see her at the house and be able to see her baby. But it wasn't something where she could ever just like come over to my house and hang out, because she would have to be at home. And it was harder for young women to say, oh yeah, I'm just going to go and hang out with my friend, or we wanted to get some dance lessons. And we had 2 local women who were going to teach a few of us how to do the local dances. And they just sort of didn't show up. And then later on, we found out that it was just that they weren't allowed to leave the house. So it was tricky, but like generally in Kiribati, there's sort of like a whiteness is a privilege, which makes you a little bit uncomfortable when you're there. But for the most part, like I wasn't worried about threats of violence against me. But you could see it all around you all the time. And in both countries, when I had male clients that I had to explain to them, like, well, one particular one in the Solomon Islands comes to mind, where I had to explain to him that even though he's estranged from his partner, he still has to pay child support. And his unwillingness to accept my advice, because like it was so abhorrent to him that he would have to pay that, as well as being told by me that that's what the law was. It was just like moments like that were pretty hard. But yeah, like I say, being a white person, I was kind of able to be a bit apart from it. But it was hard, especially if my role is mentor or educator, to have people respect me. So I had to dress probably more conservatively than women even there did sometimes. So you could never show like the shape of your thighs. So like you wouldn't ever wear tight pants. In some places you couldn't wear pants at all. So you always have to have like a longer skirt that isn't see-through at all. If you swim, I used to wear like shorts down to my knees and a t-shirt or like a rash shirt that like completely covered me. So basically you don't want to show anything tight from basically your collarbone to your knees. And that's sort of the Christian conservative missionary path.
Like the neck to knee it used to be in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had people say to me, oh, is it a Muslim country? And I'm like, no, Christians did the same rules. That's what's still happening.
True.
So yeah, so you have to be, and I had colleagues say to me, I really appreciate that you dress the way we want you to dress, because it's always very obvious when people didn't. And so if you wanted to get that respect, then you had to do that. And things like, I really love swearing, and I swear all the time, but it's a real taboo there to be swearing in both countries. So not swearing and like being respectful in that way kind of like is all the small things that you can do to kind of get that respect, to make the other more difficult conversations a bit easier to get through, where I'd have to say to someone like, you gave the wrong advice to this client and they're coming back, so that we can give them the right advice, and you made a mistake and this is what we need to do next time. So it was hard, but it was good.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And
you're welcome.
I just see that we're already at the end of our time, but of course, if anybody has any questions, bring them on now. I have one written to me, which I can read out if there are no other questions.
Yeah, sure.
So anyone needs to speak up? No. So we have one question from Claudia, and not the one you're seeing, another Claudia. With small island nations being threatened by inundation as a result of climate change-driven sea level rise, it is possible that entire territories will be wiped off the map. This raises the question as to what would happen to people and their citizenship when their nation's territory ceases to exist. Is this something that is being contemplated in the South Pacific? And especially nice question, because when we prepared that talk, Michael also brought up that, what was it, 11 years ago, we had a GAPLA conference in Sydney and had a talk on climate refugees. So I think that goes in that direction. And yeah, I mean, share with us what you maybe experienced there, because we also spoke about there are people who really do research on climate refugees.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that before I got there, when I was doing my master's, it came up a few times in a couple of the sort of human rights focused topics that I was doing. And because I was at the ANU, which is in Canberra, which is where all of the politicians and bureaucrats are, the discussion about government policy always comes up. And we were sort of thinking about like, what would happen, like do we wait until people are ankle deep in water and then just go scoop them up and everyone becomes an Australian or a New Zealander after that? Like, who knows? And then when I was in Kiribati, we talked a lot about it because there was an Kiribati man who went to New Zealand and made a claim as a climate refugee, which is what you were talking about at that conference. And there was a little bit of disquiet from Kiribati people who thought that this guy had gone too soon and that the country is still livable. So why make a claim like that and risk getting a no? And then what would happen to the rest of them? So there's also that the government in Kiribati has bought land in Fiji, which is much less likely to go under because it's got like much higher sea level land. And so that would they just move population to another country? So that's something else that's being talked about. But while I was there, my village flooded, and not from even a king tide. It was just quite a high tide, and a seawall broke, and the whole village flooded, and we all had to leave, and it ruined everybody's crops. And it sort of highlights that probably the thing that's more likely to happen before the atolls disappear is that the seawater will contaminate the fresh water. So the rainfall is very unpredictable. The groundwater is contaminated by not having proper plumbing, and people use their property to bury their dead family. So the groundwater gets contaminated. I didn't even shower in groundwater. I had a rainwater tank. Anyone who sort of uses the groundwater even to shower, you kind of end up with like skin infections and things because it's just not clean. So it's more likely that they'll probably run out of fresh water before they run out of land. And while I was there, the President Tong at that time, he's not the president now, he was very much a campaigner for recognition of the effects of climate change and what is developing countries going to do to support developed countries going to do to support developing countries. So it's trying to get that sort of publicity and momentum. But yeah, I think at this point it's not imminent enough, which seems extraordinary because it's not a great situation and people are losing land and there are consequences of climate change, but it feels like nobody's quite ready to do anything yet, which is really interesting because it's not going to get better. I don't know. Was there a hand that just went up? Yeah.
Oh no, I think somebody just left and clapped
it was a
because you did. They enjoyed.
Great.
Well, I just interpreted like that. They enjoyed your talk so much.
Okay.
So if there are no other questions, then I think we we just like to say thank you. But of course, anybody has any further questions, come up with them.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun to reminisce. It's been 5 years since I came back, so it's nice to
Thank you
find
so
all my
much.
pictures.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent.